I'm excited about deployment, and I'm most cautious about deployment because this is where you can see there are a lot of case studies in solar, wind, battery storage, geothermal, where the tech is working and it dies in deployment.
Good afternoon, Gwyn. Thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Absolutely. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm very excited for the chat today. We're going to be going into a really interesting topic, some of the hurdles and challenges that fusion might be facing in the coming decades as it moves from where it is right now to an impactful technology that's making electricity and power around the world. And as we think about some of this, I wanted to explore a little bit deeper around where we are now scientifically through to commercialization. So before we jump into that, I want to hear a bit about your background and what kind of brings you to the world of fusion.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I'm absolutely excited to talk about this, so thank you for inviting me. And it's a really important topic, and it's something that I think that everyone in this industry, either you coming from science or, the energy market, it's an exciting time, and you're not alone. There are lots of other energy sources, legacy and new, that are going through these same problems. So I don't think fusion has too much to worry about. It's just, can we do it? Can we do it? But yeah, I'll start off with um, a little bit about me. So right now, I'm currently working at Rutherford Energy Ventures, which is an investment firm focusing on supporting and enabling fusion and its ecosystem, or the potential industrialization of fusion. But before that, I spent over 6 years working at the Department of Energy, Office of Science, Fusion Energy Sciences. And I was the program manager for fusion, nuclear science, and enabling technology. So what is it? That is all of the subcomponents and technologies needed for the transition to a demonstration plant for fusion. So you think about it, it's the fuel cycle, it's the, looking at balance of plant, it's looking at materials, it's looking at blankets needed for breeding fuel, for example. And there I spent many years focusing on, how to invest government or taxpayer dollars in research, but really trying to change, like, how to think about commercialization, and how do you begin to seed research in a way that orients researchers that are studying these foundational fundamental problems and orienting them towards a potential industry, a future industry. And that takes time. And it was a really exciting program. I got to work with Scott Shue, who, when I started at DOE, he was at RPE. And there is a lot of synergies between the two programs. And we worked together a lot. And it was a very exciting time. Because this was the beginning of COVID, but also the beginning of the milestone, the development of the milestone program, the development of Fuse, the development of the fire centers. And so a lot has come in the past 6-7 years. So it was a very exciting time to be at the office and in Fusion. And before that, I actually went to the University of Tennessee to study energy science and engineering, which is an interdisciplinary graduate research program. And my research side of it was focused on fusion materials under Dr. Brian Worth, as out of the nuclear engineering department, focusing on tungsten, helium, and deuterium desorption tungsten. So, like, how does tungsten how is it able to withstand the fusion environment? But in addition to that, I studied energy system commercialization. What does that what does that mean? And it's pretty much understanding, like, the energy market. What are the hurdles for market adoption, um, on each energy system, from solar to hydropower? The whole point was to look at, um, what is the current state of, and having an integrated resource portfolio, and what are the hurdles, for each one of these systems, and why do certain regions, countries, states even, um, develop policies to support, a diverse portfolio, because the sun doesn't always shine, in every state, right? I think in the Southwest, you have greater than 300 days of sunshine, while, in the Northeast and even in the Northwest, you have less than 200 days, right? So that interdisciplinary exposure opened my eyes to just the overall challenges, and that's what led me to where I am today. So, yeah, that's a little bit about my background, and so this is why I'm really excited to talk about commercialization.
Yeah, I love asking this question because it's always interesting to kind of serendipitously look back and see how all of these things have come together. And it's fascinating that you have kind of the strong technical foundation, the commercialization review and work as well, through to being the architect of a lot of the DOE programs that have been the foundation for where we've been able to get to today. So that's great. I'm really looking forward to going a little bit deeper. So where do we actually stand today? At the moment, there's been a lot of, scientific and technological progress, and we're moving towards commercialization. We're hearing, fusion is in a commercialization stage. Like, what does that mean?
Okay, first, it's exciting. It's an exciting time, and I wanna take us out of fusion for a moment and think about, the current market as it is today, and what is, motivating the growth that you're seeing in fusion, and kind of why things are happening a bit faster than you would expect, because there is still science to de-risk, but there's also motivating factors that are pushing these companies into areas that are more, uncomfortable, but it's also this fast learning curve for them to then begin to demonstrate their various concepts. So when everyone is aware of what is happening with the oil crisis in the Middle East and pressures there. Everyone is very aware of the active, strategies for electrification and decarbonization, depending on which country has what strategy. Also, energy independence and security. Also, just GDP growth in countries that are developing and securing their place in a value chain, whatever it may be. It may not even be in energy markets, but they are working to create economic development, right? And all of those things coming together create demand. And everyone knows the curve, like the supply demand curve. But this is a motivating factor that is then asking for, um, all hands on deck. Any energy source that you have is needed, but also at the same time, so there's that demand, but also at the same time, you're transitioning due to other geopolitical factors where there's pressure on supply chain, there's pressure on, um, sourcing, all of these things. And then you have at the same time a decrease in one source or another. And so this is what, like, energy transition is. So some do it for purposes of reducing their carbon footprint. Others are doing it for security reasons, but the math is the same. You have an increase in demand, you have a transition of sources, which is then putting pressure on the existing sources. and you still have to meet that demand. So that then readies the environment for new generation or building more generation, right? More wind, more solar, more fission, more fusion, right? And there are gripes about all energy sources. You know, I won't go into it, but there are. And so this predicates the potential for fusion, right? And this is why you're seeing companies push for behind the meter PPAs or strategic partnerships with um, already existing commercial partners for building and for working with utilities. And this is just for demonstration plans, first of a kind plans, um, which you normally don't see unless there's a significant government partner traditionally when you look back. And so because of that environment, this is what is pushing fusion forward. And there are companies that are doing that are starting to face open that door and face those challenges of what does it really mean to go from a science experiment, a demonstration of my science, to a demonstration of a power plant, which is the orchestration or the bringing together of all those things. But only because there's that market pull, right? So I would say that is where we are right now. And I don't really foresee it lessening in the future, which is good, but it's then, okay, can we deliver, right?
Yeah, I think I really love how you articulated that because those confluence of events are kind of really interesting to outline with regards to where we are today. I think even the other dimension, which is really important, that has a lot of pull, is two dimensions. One is obviously the AI narrative, where there's a huge demand signal there to be able to power compute, and then the other one is that people are also seeing that. That fusion is an interesting class of investment as well, because that's, one of the reasons that we're able to be able to drive that forward without having the government participation in the same way. So it's kind of risk is shared across, different stakeholders that traditionally new technologies like this haven't in the past, which I think is fascinating.
No, you make a very good point because it's twofold. It's like a novelty premium, right? So there there is interest in this not only from like an investment perspective, but from any other technology development company like a hyperscaler, like AI, that is looking to offset their footprint, but also be able to not not only offset their footprint, but offset the additional costs that they will have to their local grid. Okay. And if they are able to um, pull in resources behind the meter or offset the pricing with regards to transmission interconnect, which are already a stress to the grid. Um, and how they can offset that is assisting in the construction of a particular source, whether it be um, an existing legacy energy source or fusion, which is new. Um, they are willing to pay a, a higher price of electricity depending on the terms that they have in their PPA, but also they then have the opportunity to say, "Hi, I'm OpenAI. I have a fusion power plant." And that gives them a novelty premium that they're willing to pay because they can say that they have that. That's one. And then two, if you think about fusion long term, like everything is happy. We've deployed a plant and things are working out. When you think about the way that you can invest in fusion long term, it looks, if you are still thinking about the way that demand is growing and your resources are shifting, say you want to electrify transportation, big transportation, right? Uh, you're still going to have to meet the electricity demand for that. and the decrease that you have in other resources, that is then, if you are invested in like a diverse portfolio across multiple sources, energy sources, then investing in fusion could potentially look like a hedge, right? And that makes it very interesting for a long-term investor, right? And that is taking risk off the table and putting it into a new concept.
Understood. I think that's really interesting. Obviously, there's different mechanisms and there's different motivations behind why people are bringing fusion into their portfolios, either as investors or as end users. I want to go a little bit deeper into when you outlined that journey and you spoke about, there's scientific validation with these integrated demonstrations and they're being able to showcase that they can have all their systems kind of handshaking with each other and operating as they intend. As that prototype, it moves further towards, an operating power plant that's consistently providing, electricity and power to customers. What changes need to happen? What does the journey look like?
A lot. But it really depends on your end customer. So I in Fusion, you hear a lot where the community likes to say, we need availability, we need reliability, we need a plant that can operate um, continuously. That isn't necessarily true. Okay. Because every country may need a different source for a different purpose. And what is very unique for fusion right now, because of all the different concepts that are starting and like demonstrating their tech right now, is that when you look across the different concepts, this is where you have diversity in not only the power that they can provide, whether it be base load or whether it be, smaller, more modular plants where it's like 100 megawatts, and they're, stacking them, right? And they're focusing on modularity. But what is important to determine, or what is important to think about, is what is my minimum viable product at the end of the day? So if I'm working with my customer and they are like, I'm willing to buy, you know, 10 plants, 5 plants, but what I am interested in is reliability, or I'm interested in, ensuring that you're available at this particular power level, then it takes the team, like a company's team, to be able to orchestrate a design that can deliver that. And that will look very different than what I think that we are thinking about. Like when we are working from like the science to the customer, we're like, okay, this is what they need. They need a diverter that lasts 10 years. They need a blanket that, is a TBR, can breed greater than like a 1 ratio, right? That may not be true, okay? If a customer says, "I'm willing to buy, but I need reduced engineering complexity. I need reliability." Reliability not in its output, but in its maintenance, in its right. When we think about this, they're like, "Then maybe," and I'm literally just, like, spitballing here, "maybe it's a plant without a blanket, and you're just injecting tritium, but it's operating at high power density, and you got a good shield in there, and you're able to produce the power that they need," right? So that design looks very different than the way that I think the way that the community is thinking about what a plant looks like, right? And it is, in industry, they are looking at how can I, because the way, and I don't think people understand kind of the business model. Like if you give me a second to talk about the business models in the energy market, there's build, owner, operate. But you really don't see that anymore. You see companies that develop the design and they are an OEM. So they pick a component that they are a manufacturer of or multiple components, and then they license the design to a EPC who is also working with an operator, right? It's all kind of subcontracted because people have their specialties. It's really hard to be the builder, the owner, the operator all in one in this economic environment. And so that means if you are a designer of a plant and your end customer is like, dude, I need to ensure that my supply chains are secure and I can get all the materials that I need easily. And I don't have to rely on choke points or countries that throttle supply chain reliability, right? If I'm able to do that and build a plant modularly and get the power that I need, then and Fusion is able to do that. And a company is able to develop a strategic team to be able to do that. That's success. That's what success looks like, right? And I think that's in reality, we don't talk about that a lot. We always focus on the tech. What's tech? How's the tech going to deliver? And it's much more nuanced than that.
I love the nuance you just brought about just the markets in which fusion technologies can play into, because I think typically people, when they think about fusion, they think of it as a monolith market that's just firm and clean supply, and ultimately it is segmented. One way it's segmented in many dimensions. In one way, I see it segmented as just size of plant. And you can see that analog in fission, where you have large scale, you have kind of small modular, which is around that 300 megawatt, and then you have kind of micro, which is, it's kilowatt range, really small. And ultimately, you can see that from the fact we are very early in the technology development, that there is so much divergence of concepts. There hasn't been kind of a narrowing down or consolidation of, this is the model or architecture that makes sense. We're seeing that there's, something could replace diesel generators. You have something that could potentially, apply more to gas peaker plants, and also just inherent size of the capacity that they operate in allows you to have different customer set. And on the business model, I completely agree. I think that being an international vertically integrated power provider in every geography and jurisdiction is like, I don't think there is an analog for that.
No.
And it's people need to have a focus with regards to the market they play in and how they're executing on that with regards to where they're playing in the value chain. And there are different market sizings for that. And there are different value magnitude of opportunity, but it's how you've assembled your team or how your technology best fits into that context and the customer ultimately as well. So I think that's a nuance that I love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think right now, and I completely understand that we still have technology and science to de-risk, but the earlier you start to think about this, even if you're engaging your in customer just in a sense of collaboration, it is so important in the development of your team and the way that you integrate it into your design. Because the more that you're aware of kind of what it is that actually matters to them and what they are looking for, that then helps you select particular materials, particular more, if you're thinking about reducing the complexity of your design, right? Because one thing that some customers were like, hey, is, dude, I have like a supplier list of like over 129, different vendors that I have to manage. And you're just increasing complexity, which then increases the potential delay in time, which then increases, of course, budget, right? And so if you're thinking about how can I do this in a way that reduces this complexity and is able to still meet the needs that my customer is interested in, then that relationship is potentially mutually beneficial. and you're more likely going to get innovative financing to finance the deployment of those reactors.
That makes sense. So one of the things you mentioned before, you were talking about, customers might have a focus on certain maintenance, performance characteristics that may be favorable to the operating paradigm they want to work in. How do you think, more broadly looking at the field, companies in fusion are thinking about operations, uptime, capacity factor, things like that?
From my perspective, I think they're not thinking enough about it, um, because it really does inform how you select the particular materials that you make your components out of and how you make your components. Because if they are interchangeable or if you can reduce the maintenance cycle, like if your end customer really cares about how not the fact that you have to do maintenance more frequently, right? There are different ways that you can kind of skin this cat, but it's more like if you are able to deliver the power density that they require, but it requires you to be down more often, like your downtime is more frequent, then it's how do I design a system that can reduce my downtime if they need me to be available for X percentage throughout the year, right? That's one example. And the thing is the more modular, if you think about modularity, not only on a subcomponent scale, but as your entire design, there are ways that you can design the system to have capacity stacking, where you have a plant that is down while you have another plant operating, kind of then, exchange them out. But that the way that you design your plant will inform the maintenance cycle. And I think that when we think about the selection of her materials, for example, I'm just focusing on the most largest part of a fusion plant and all the materials that go into it. When you're thinking about the selection of the material, you could choose a material that is focused on long lifetime, but that may not be the right material because you don't get a high power density out, for example, right? Because there are issues with the performance of the plant. And then that ultimately does not align with your end customer. And that then doesn't allow for you to have the availability that you're needing, even if it's, you're not down for a particular amount of time. Another thing that, this is very high level. If we think about what the fusion environment actually is, it's a radiological environment. And we have to be very frank and aware and open about what that maintenance cycle looks like with regards to the radiation exposure. And yes, fission and fusion are completely different environments. But what is very exciting now with like this resurgence of fission is that we have the opportunity to learn from a industry that has perfected the maintenance cycle. Perfected. Like a 90%, they have perfected the way that they do their maintenance cycle, and that is something that we can learn from. And there's great opportunity for synergies there. I don't think a lot of people talk about that, but there are synergies between fission and fusion.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is, I would say, when I look at the industry at the moment, there seems to be obviously a lot of indexing on CapEx, but ultimately the whole entire life cycle cost, whichever is the lowest when looking at, the time horizon for how long your plant, the lifetime of your plant for operations, maintenance, even decommissioning, is something that I think was brought out of the fission industry, which I think is best practice for a lot of energy technologies at the moment. So I think that would be really something that could be a good learning for the industry to really think about that. And those like RAMI consideration, I think RAMI is the acronym, kind of reliability, availability, maintainability, inspectability, should be part of the design philosophy. And I know a lot of companies, it is critical to how they're making trade-offs in the design space. And ultimately how, like leaning again on the fission analog, it took, I believe, in the late 60s, early 70s, the average capacity factor of the global fleet was like 60%. This is like 20 commercial reactors around the world was like 60%. And basically, through all that operational experience, that was elevated to where it is today, which is, I think an average above 80, where many plants are in the 90s. I think the really good thing is that, fusion has some really positive considerations in the fact that you can iterate machines much quicker, but there is that radiation consideration. Like, I think, there's no kind of hiding behind the fact that, you know, there may be thousands of sieverts per hour coming from components. And that's really spicy. But it's for a short amount of time, not on the same timescales as fission. So there are differences there, but that has challenges for access. And ultimately, you need robotics, you need kind of new innovations. But ultimately, again, you like reflecting on nuclear, a lot of those have been built because they needed to have operational excellence with regards to their maintenance cycles, but also kind of they've learnt some of these decommissioning and access things from things like Fukushima and Chernobyl, where it's kind of these new things that can be leveraged in the fusion domain, which I think is really cool.
Yes. No, I completely agree. And I don't think it's talked about enough, the opportunity to have the synergies between the two in with respect to public safety and public health, right? Because that's what, you know, ultimately you are trying to provide electrons on the grid or energy for industrial heat or what have you. But the maintenance of it is for ultimately the safety of the public of where that plant is located. And if we are serious about deployment and serious about commercialization, and it behooves us to not take lessons learned from an industry that has spent many decades perfecting this process under such a stringent regulatory regime. And where fusion has a bit of freedom and hindsight, we have then the opportunity that is a recipe, if done right, to accelerate development. If you find the right people to inform your team, to then be able to integrate into your design, you have the opportunity to accelerate development just because of the environment of you have an existing industry that you can leverage. You have a regulatory environment right now that is more open, and that recipe allows for that to happen. It just then really kind of boils down to, do you have the network, the exposure to the individuals that can inform your team to be able to do that?
Yeah, that's really insightful, and I think the regulatory context for fusion is probably one of its most favorable characteristics to be able to be successful. So it's definitely one that deserves a lot of praise for the people that are working kind of tirelessly in that space to make sure that it's a risk informed and graded approach to how technology is regulated. I want to pivot a little bit to kind of the economic investment realities of fusion. Someone that works at the intersection of investment and fusion, what what does a what does a bankable fusion project actually need to demonstrate?
Oh my gosh, I could talk like forever about this. Um, it is right now we have to think innovatively about the way that we finance uh, infrastructure. And there's lots to be learned right now, literally what's happening right now in the way that financing of infrastructure across fission, geothermal, like existing infrastructure being built and deployed globally, not just in the United States, and how they are financing them and how government has like a role to play differently than the way that financing for this type of infrastructure was done in the past, right? There's lots to be done. And this, it is important to understand why there's quote unquote like a missing middle, what a missing middle is, which is you get to the point where you have the financing from VC and various investors, and you've done your kind of your demonstration plants, and you're moving to first of a kind, but the margins are a bit thin, and customers aren't willing to offtake the first, the second, the fleet level, right? They're still waiting for additional learning curves to happen. This is what is called the missing middle, where because of the capex required for those plants, at least initially, require an innovative capital stack to finance. And we right now in the environment, we have this demand that comes with a higher uh, cap table, and this is because of AI. Now, I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket, and I'll clarify this because there's a lot of hype out there that there's a bubble and all of those things. However, what is interesting here is that these companies are already working and developing innovative financial structures through PPAs and other means to finance the deployment of these plants. When traditionally, because the margins were so thin in a regulated market, for example, it was very hard to justify the financing of a plant that isn't fully de-risked or learning curves. It's not far down that learning curve, and so the capital cost is still high, right? And it is really taking a look at what is the combination of leveraging, doing behind the meter, and looking for a combination of state and local government subsidies and federal government partnership and the opportunity for investment longer term to see how you can actually de-risk fusion as a fleet, thinking about it as a fleet product, if that makes sense. But yeah, that is where it's at right now. There's no guarantee that this is how it will be in the future. But we have a lot to learn on the way that the type of financial structures are being developed because of the presence of company hyperscalers and companies like Google and Microsoft and OpenAI that are willing to work with utilities and also government partners to design PPAs that cover more than what you would normally see if you were to enter into a regulated market and do traditional financing for a plant. So that is very exciting right now.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad that there's a lot of work going into that space because it's the missing middle. Heard it called the messy middle.
The messy middle, yes.
Yeah, because there is a gap there, and it ultimately needs some new capital structures, and also needs some nuanced ways that risk can be allocated and an opportunity among different stakeholders. So I'm glad that there are people looking at that. I wanted to talk a little bit more around the broader ecosystem. So there's obviously many other ingredients that need to be able to come together. Things like supply chain, the policy environment, workforce. What needs to happen in some of these areas, if you can kind of touch on them a little bit? I know there's a very, very long and deep dive into each of them, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on those areas.
I think I'll start from the tech and then I'll transition because I think on the science side, we're already seeing a transition where yes, there's a place to be had for additional plasma science, and there are mechanisms that already support that, and hopefully with the emergence of industry, you will see something similar to NEUP developing, right? Where you have the opportunity for an industry to exist, but at the same time, you are still continuing that foundational science endeavor. But what you're seeing is a transition away from the traditional plasma science and general plasma science to a more tech focused. So this is where it's more interdisciplinary. And this is also where you are then competing against other industries that are then competing for the same workforce. So I'll focus on workforce for now, but we have a lot of really interesting opportunities to think about what is fusion and what is it analogous to, and how we can then begin to work to encourage a increase in workforce or a sharing of workforce. And fusion is it's a compilation of very complex systems, and people relate it to um, the space like shuttle, people relate it to like SpaceX rocket, people relate it to designing an airplane like Boeing type, where you are orchestrating supply chains of like multiple components and then bringing it together, which means you were trying to recruit across multiple disciplines. So chemistry, aerospace, mechanical, all of the above. And that then, if you understand, if you think about the future of where you're going, you have the opportunity to begin to bring in individuals that may not be familiar with fusion, but have worked on these types of infrastructure projects, or projects like, individuals from Blue Origin or SpaceX, or that are familiar with one, product development, and two, agile iterative design, and complex engineering systems. And being able to attract is hard in this environment. Everyone, everyone, it is a constant. It's like pushing a hill, pushing a rock up a hill. But what I think fusion has that maybe, I mean, space, you can see it. There's this mission and this purpose, this kind of like inner core um, need to work on something greater than yourself and be able to give back to um, the planet that you live on. I think fusion, one thing I know about fusion, and this is just from my personal experience, is that every person I meet in fusion comes to it because of the mission, the purpose, the feeling that it creates burning inside them, that they one day will create a new energy source that has the potential to change um, the way that we power our planet as we know it, right? And that begins to attract people. It's just then, how do our companies message? So I'll just get off my little soapbox with regards to workforce and how I would encourage companies to think outside the box and start recruiting from firms outside of fusion. Supply chain is, when you think about how, I hate to use this reference, but this is pretty much what it is. So Reagan economics is this trickle down effect where if you invest in the company that is designing the product, they invest in the supply chain, and so if that company is successful, then the supply chain needed to develop that company is successful, and thus it's a trickle down effect. Yeah, that doesn't work. um, and so we have to be very smart about how, if we are investing in the supply chain, because the thing is, for fusion, the components required for fusion still need development. They are applicable to other markets. They have other uses, but because the other use existed before fusion, then their manufacturing supply chain and their components and the way that they've designed their product, like optimized it for that end product, it then needs development and capital investment to then change it for fusion. So there are suppliers out there that can, you know, lend a hand almost and develop these products, but they're not going to be like, well, I have a market that I supply and I'm able to generate like 100 million or so in revenue. I'm not going to pivot unless there's investment, unless I see something protected in the future. Where is that signal? And so the way that you can stimulate development in supply chain is, I think, twofold. So one is the signal from government's involvement, right? You have the opportunity for government to not only invest in the company, but also invest in the supply chain itself. That's a signal, meaning we consider fusion serious, and we plan to maybe develop the first couple plants and then scale fleet accordingly. And that then sends a signal to supply chain to begin to add a business line for fusion. However, they also need more capital to do that because it's just more expensive. They also are managing risk like downstream from the actual company itself. They are the ones that are managing dealing with critical materials that are from sensitive countries. They are the ones that are trying to decide, is it okay if I replace this material with this? Will my end customer be okay with that? And offset, you need to understand that offsetting that risk downstream costs money, and how you invest in them is to say, okay, based on the existing portfolio of companies that are existing, which suppliers would potentially be not the choke point, but like the critical supplier. Like you think of like ASML, or you think, about TSMC, the semiconductor industry, where you had strategic investment and critical suppliers of a particular component. Then similarly in fusion, if you have identified the critical suppliers that are able to supply more than one concept across the board, and focus and invest in that company and assisting in scaling that, and also understand what is their current market. Do they have applicability to other things outside of that? That is an opportunity for investment that normally people don't think about. And so that's where you have like the chicken and the egg. But you have to think beyond that and think about what is the potential for the product beyond just fusion in a power plant. Is there other market applicability? And I think that's where investing in supply chain, mostly it doesn't happen, but there's really interesting opportunity there that I think people miss. So, yeah.
I wanted to finish on a final question was around what what are you most excited about in fusion, and also what are you most cautious about in fusion?
It's the same thing for me. What I'm cautious and excited about. I'm excited about deployment. Deployment. And I'm most cautious about deployment because this is where you see a lot of this. You can see that there are a lot of case studies in um, solar, wind, battery storage, geothermal, where the tech is working and it dies in deployment. And this is because it really matters about the market environments that you're deploying in. And no one has a crystal ball or can predict like whether a war is going to break out or not. No one has that. But it is having a really good, firm team that is able, or even an advisory board is another way, or a group of strategic partners that can help almost assist in the understanding of deployment in a particular environment. So, and being strategic about your deployment is critical, and really understanding market environments that are like pro fusion and maybe not so much, and how do you shift accordingly. And that takes a lot of time, effort, money, and awareness. And it makes me most excited because I think fusion, because of all of the thing, we have so much to learn from all of the failed deployments that has happened, like across many administrations, across many countries, where there were shelved tech that worked, that just were not maybe right for the environment. And so if we can think about the lessons learned from that and then apply them to fusion, and when we get the first plant built and demonstrated, and we move to the second and the third, and being strategic about those placements and those partners, that's what makes me very excited because I think we have the potential to really do something different. But I'm also cautious about it because I don't know if there are many teams or companies that are thinking about that long game, just because they're laser focused on de-risking their tech and they're not thinking forward about the potential environment. And, you know, you may finish your tech and the environment isn't ripe, but that doesn't mean that you can't find one that is.
I'm excited listening to you talk about how excited you are. I think that it is a very opportunity-rich time, and you're completely right that, there is a different leg of the race coming up with regards to commercialization. It's gonna be very exciting to watch. So thank you again for jumping in and exploring this with me, and looking forward to watching the journey unfold with you.
Oh, thank you. I'm also excited. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Awesome. Have a good one. Bye.
You too.